Books and Brews Light. I believe we're on number 27, and our guest today is Jennifer Celeste Briggs. So welcome, Jenny, and I would like you to introduce yourself and tell us about your book.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. My book is called Watching Sarah Rise, A Journey of Thriving with Autism. And I think the most important bit of who I am for that is that I am Sarah's mom. And I got into this journey by deciding I wanted to have kids. And then my oldest, Sarah, had special needs. And that was apparent very early on. She was diagnosed as failure to thrive. And all the milestones were very hard won, and we didn't know if she would meet them ever. Didn't know if she would learn to walk, talk, feed herself, use the toilet, anything. And when she was 4, she was still not speaking. She could make sounds for the letters of the alphabet, but she wasn't putting words together. So I trained at the Autism Treatment Center of America for how to run a Sunrise program. And I started a home therapy program for Sarah, and I called it Sarah Rise. I had a designated room, I had volunteers, and her language exploded, and she learned to connect and to play and to use the toilet and to eat healthily. And our lives just changed so much through that experience that I wanted to share that with everyone.
That's fantastic. And I think that I misunderstood. I thought that you had started the Autism Center, but it's something that existed already?
Right.
Okay.
It was started by Barry Nail Kaufman and Samaria Light Kaufman.
Okay. How long has that been around?
They did their program for their son, Ron Kaufman, in the 1970s. I don't know precisely when they started the Autism Treatment Center of America, because it took some time for them to work with their son and then word to get out of how much he'd changed and transformed. And then for parents to start coming, knocking on their door, basically saying, hey, can you teach me what you did?
Right.
Yeah.
I've known a few kids with autism over the years, and it is truly remarkable. Well, first of all, how broad the spectrum is. I did hear a comment once. Somebody said about the autism specialist at my kid's school, she's an autism specialist. She's looking for autism. She is going to find it. And I'm kind of curious, is that something, how do you feel about that? Are people being overdiagnosed, or do you think the autism specialists are pretty accurate?
I'm not sure that I know enough to weigh in on that, but I will say the spectrum is so vast that it can seem like people are having different conversations. The people who are really, really high functioning then maybe wanting different representation out in the world and for people to talk about it in a different way than the parents of kids who are having a really hard time processing their world to the point where they might be screaming a lot and aren't able to communicate. And that is such a desperate place to be as a parent. I feel like those ends of the spectrum are so far apart that it's kind of hard to talk about it as one thing, even if the underlying way to support a person might be the same.
Right. So what does the Sunrise program do? Can you give some idea of how they help kids with autism?
Yeah, and it is designed actually to meet kids or adults on any part of the spectrum, wherever they are, with the idea of supporting them as they are, for who they are, where they are, not stopping repetitive behavior or repetitive topics of conversation, but really meeting that as that's your doorway in. So they recommend, if people want to set up a focus room, that helps the grownups as well as the kids to focus. So that's what I did with Sarah.
What is a focus room?
Well, or you could call it a playroom. It's a room where you go in with your kid and you don't have a lot of posters on the walls and you don't have lots of toys around. You maybe have a shelf with some toys that you could reach, and it's up high so that they would have to communicate in some way with you, and you're very user friendly. You immediately leap to grab whatever you think they want. But that was super helpful for me because I needed to cut out my own distractions. So it was helpful for Sarah to not have lots of things on the wall that she would want to look at. She's really into fabric textures and thresholds, and to
Speaking of being
simplify.
distracted, I just heard my phone go off.
Yes. So I
I'm
had
trying
to
turn off the volume. I'm not ignoring you.
I had to not have my phone. I had to not
Mhm.
be seeing my pile of mail or dishes or emails to return to clients or anything like that, but to say, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to focus on my daughter for 2 hours and just going to follow her lead. So the
Mhm.
Sunrise program is really about following a child's lead or an adult's lead about what they want to talk about or what they want to do. If they want to do something repetitive and they're not acknowledging you, you get your own thing that is similar and you sit a few feet away and you really enjoy doing the same thing they're doing as the way to
Mhm.
communicate, I love you. I love what you're doing. I want to be here with you. And then that makes it easier for them to sort of take you into their world and start noticing you. So for Sarah, we would spend many, many minutes, maybe half an hour at a time, opening and closing a lid or cutting through the Velcro wooden pizza toy. And then she would
Mhm.
look at me. And if she would look at me, then I could say something or do something to make it interesting for her that she had looked at me.
Right.
And then she started looking at me more and her language
Mhm.
started to grow because she was looking at me and watching my mouth if I would say something.
I find this fascinating. When you were first told that this was the method, did you believe this would work?
Well, I had actually read the book by Barry Neil Kaufman called Sunrise when I was in college. So years before I
Okay.
had Sarah, I had known about this program. I thought it was amazing. I almost
Mhm.
thought, gee, I wish I could run a Sunrise program for someone.
Mhm.
And then you fast forward to me having Sarah, and I'm just trying to
Yes.
survive and get through the days, but then thinking we need to do something more. And I actually did the training before I had the autism diagnosis for her. But once I got it, I thought, well, that's fine. I'm already doing the thing that I believe is the best and most helpful, loving approach to support her going forward.
It's like the pieces of your life were put into place to prepare you for this.
Yeah.
If you sat here and told me this would work and you didn't have the proof to back it up, I'd be like, that's crazy. How can that possibly work to sit and do the autistic actions with a child? I would say, wouldn't that just reinforce it? But that's amazing.
Yeah. And that is, I think, a prevailing belief out there in the world that it
Uh-huh.
will reinforce it. And so
Mhm.
a lot of therapies seek to stop the repetitive behavior
Yep.
instead of joining with it. For Sarah, it was incredibly effective to join her in the repetitive behavior. And by joining, it's more than just copying. It's really trying to understand it and enjoy it.
Mhm.
And I know the Sunrise program has been effective and helpful for
Right.
many, many families all over the world. There's no guarantee that someone will learn to speak. There's no
Mhm.
guarantee that eye contact will be easier for them. Sometimes that's really not the way a person pays attention. It's
Mhm.
just how most of us assume that someone pays attention is by
Right.
eye
Right.
contact. But having Sarah look at me did make it easier for her to learn to speak. And that was
Right.
wonderful for us. And then
Well, I
some
think,
families, mm,
yeah, I think this idea of understanding is so key. Um, I think autism was kind of less well known when I was growing up. You know, they keep saying it's really exploded. But one of the things that really helped me to understand what's going on in an autistic child's mind, I read something that was talking about this child who would be on the floor of the car screaming and yelling, and the poor mother couldn't understand why until she realized. I think it was a certain part of town they were driving through, maybe, and she realized there was construction, something like that. And he was reacting to sounds that she didn't even notice. And she realized there are sensory things happening. And that's why he's reacting. To him, it's sounding like, I don't know, a foghorn blowing 2 inches from his ear or nails on chalkboard. No wonder he's screaming. And once she understood that, you know, I think once anyone understands what someone else is experiencing, it becomes much easier to deal with it.
definitely, and how to support them and how to simplify that environment. Yeah.
Mhm. One of the comments that you make on your website is that you struggled with feeling like a bad parent. Was that up till the age of 4? Was it before the diagnosis, or did it continue after the diagnosis?
I think it comes and goes. I mean, even just a couple days ago, I was not the
Mhm.
mom I wish I was. But I think in the early years when things were so hard, I felt so responsible, even
Mhm.
though it wasn't anything I did or didn't do that led to Sarah having her challenges. But with all the early intervention and the people coming to help and saying, oh, do this thing with her, do that thing with her, I just felt so overwhelmed. And
Yes.
as if it was my responsibility to get her to eat enough and to learn to speak or learn to pick her head up when she was doing tummy time. And so, yeah, I felt a lot of guilt and
Right.
fear. And then when I did the week of training at the Autism Treatment Center of America, suddenly all these bricks, the fear and responsibility and guilt fell away because I think I felt more empowered and
Mhm.
less judgmental of where she was. And I was in a room full of parents who were dealing with very similar things. I was like, oh, here is permission to just love my kid. And here are new tools that might work better,
Mhm.
because all of the speech therapy that we had been trying was not actually helping her learn. And part of that may have just been how much time, because she was getting maybe half an hour or an hour a week. Once I started
Mhm.
working with her, and we ramped up our program with volunteers, she was getting 2 to 6 to 8 hours of one-on-one time a day, mainly
Wow.
focusing on speech. And so, yes, her language exploded.
Mhm. So how did you get volunteers? How many did you have? And was this from a church or school, or how would you tell other people to get volunteers to help them?
Yeah, well, that is actually part of the training at the
Okay.
Autism Treatment Center of America. They teach you how to set up a playroom, how to work with your kid, and how to find volunteers and train volunteers
Okay.
with various ideas. But what I did was I sent out an email to friends and family, both local to Pittsburgh and elsewhere, figuring you never know who knows someone. I said,
Hmm.
this is what I'm going to do. If you would like to participate, I will train you to play with Sarah. If you would like to watch my younger daughter, Amy, because she was
Hmm.
still, when I did the training, she was half a year old. So I couldn't just leave her by herself. Um,
Right.
but if I had someone with her, then I could be with Sarah. Or if someone wanted to fix me dinner, then that would be great. That would be one less thing I had to think about. So I got a bunch of
Right.
people that way. Some friends, I'm an Alexander Technique teacher. And so some of my colleagues from that wanted to volunteer for both roles. And
Hmm.
I also asked one of my Alexander Technique friends who worked at a college at Carnegie Mellon University. I said, can you send this to your acting students? And she
Hmm.
did. And I got one answer, and he became a volunteer, and he was so enthusiastic. He told all his
Hmm.
friends. So I got 3 more volunteers.
Oh, wow. So
And
you almost overwhelmed with help?
sometimes, I mean, people would sort of come and go. Sometimes people could only be helping during a summer before they went back to college,
Mhm.
or only on weekends. There were times when I had more people interested in volunteering than I had space to accommodate. But a
Mhm.
lot of the time it was, oh, I had someone for 6 months or a year, and now they are moving on with their life. Now I need some more people.
So how many years did you have these volunteers? How many years were you doing this work with Sarah specifically, or is it ongoing?
I would say it was about 5 years from the very beginning starting until I basically said, okay, we're almost officially done. Yes, we still have a couple volunteers coming, but she's going off to school full time, and
Okay.
I'm done managing this program. But I also think that the whole way of thinking about how to interact with her, how to meet her where she is, how to support her, that's always going to be with us as a family.
Right.
And so we can't take that away. So in many ways, our life is still the Sarah Rise program, but just less intense.
Right. I think that's good advice for anyone, though. It's so easy to look at someone else and go, why can't you be more like me, which is usually what we're thinking, because we usually think we're perfect. But I think it's just great advice to meet anyone where they are and try and accept, they came from a different place. They might have had different experiences, and get to know them. But how old is she now?
She just turned 18.
Oh, she's an adult. So
Yes.
at this point, would someone not even guess that she was ever autistic?
She still needs quite a bit of support and is quite different from her neurotypical peers.
Okay.
So I think anyone meeting her would very quickly understand that she is a unique, sparkly individual who maybe needs some extra time to answer questions. That's the biggest thing I remind people about. And she reads at probably like a second grade level. Math is very, very hard for her. And she connects more easily with adults than with her age peers. Although her sister knows how to follow her lead. And sometimes talking with Sarah it feels like you've stumbled into an Escher print, because for her, time, I think, is more malleable. And so she can start talking about something and you're like, wait a second, that was 5 years ago, which it can take us a minute to catch up to where she is. But it also means that if we ever need to know information, I'm like, who was that person that we met in this city?
You'll remember it.
She knows. That's right.
Right. I know someone who maybe is a little bit similar. He plays piano by ear, and he'll sit down and play something like a theme from a TV program that he hasn't watched in 5 years or more. But he still has the entire melody, chords, everything, and sits down, plays it by ear. So that is remarkable. I am curious, you also mentioned on your site, pretending markers are flowers and number flashcards are snowflakes. What does that mean?
Yeah, that is a great question. So once we would enter the room, if I would go in the room with Sarah for my 2-hour time with her, then basically I tried to not leave the room unless one of us needed to use the bathroom. We would bring in snacks if it was going to be over a time when one of us would be hungry. And because we kept the toys relatively simple and limited, that meant we had to be very imaginative. So we always had paper and markers and pencils. For a while, she loved these number flashcards that were from the Handwriting Without Tears kit. And then I made more number flashcards because she loved them so much. And so with that as a prop, if she wanted something else, we would just pretend, or that was my job as her facilitator to come up with something creative. I don't even know how we started with the markers being flowers. It might have been that she was just putting them in a container, and I pretended, oh, this looks like a vase with flowers, and then pretended to prick my finger on a thorn and toss the marker in the air. And so we had so much fun. And I think that has led her to be very creative and flexible. So I often say she is simultaneously the most rigid and the most flexible person that I know. She can desperately want a certain thing, like a t-shirt with a speedometer. Like she wants this thing now. But if I get her paper and a pencil, or she gets it herself and she draws her own speedometer and tapes it on whatever shirt she's wearing, well, then the problem is solved. Everything's fine. She's got her speedometer shirt.
I was kind of laughing as you were talking about, this imagination thing. I have a funny story. I hate baking. I just it's the last thing I want to do. But my kids absolutely love baking. And I think it's because when they were little, I actually did bake with them sometimes, and we would make up these stories like you put in the butter, and that's, I don't know, a building in the village, and then you pour the sugar on, and oh no, it's an avalanche of snow. And then, I don't know, if you sprinkle them with chocolate chips or whatever, here come, I don't know, the rescuers, the Bernese mountain dogs with their brandy on their neck. And we would make up these stories that went along with the ingredients and what we were doing. And now I've got even my boys. I don't know how many of them, but several of my boys like baking too. And I always think that's so funny. How did someone like me produce kids who like to bake? but it worked.
That is brilliant. I love that idea of creating the story around it.
Yeah,
That's
they
really
had fun
great.
with that. I am curious, to touch on kind of a hot button issue. Why do you think autism is skyrocketing?
I don't know. I don't know. I do think that probably people are paying more attention. And
Mhm.
when you're looking for a red car, you see all the red cars, right?
Right. Mhm.
And for Sarah, it's partly a genetic basis. And so I
Mhm.
think a lot of times autism may be coming from a genetic root, and those things didn't maybe used to be linked together in terms of
Okay.
people understanding. I'm really not sure about that, but you're right.
Yeah.
It is a hot button topic out there.
Right. There are certainly people with plenty of ideas, and I suppose my only hope would be that there can sometimes be this fighting and name calling. If somebody doesn't agree with somebody else's, like, we should all just want to get at the truth and find out. So what is in your book specifically? Is it more a memoir, or does it really get into the Sunrise program?
It is a memoir starting with the early years with Sarah of the failure to thrive and how are we going to help her and all the different therapies we tried. Then deciding to run a Sunrise program. How did I arrange help to go do the training? I had to have my sister-in-law fly in from Seattle to help, and my mom came up to Massachusetts with me to help with my younger daughter.
Uh-huh.
And then how I found volunteers, and then really getting into the playtimes, like, oh, what was this playtime like? How did I train the volunteers? What made the markers become flowers? What did I do when she said certain things? How did she grow and change? How did we address how to make hair washing a better experience for her? Because she used to really scream about that. And then what it was like, basically bringing in the love and creativity of the volunteers and allowing myself to receive that, plus all the times that I felt like an imperfect bad mom, and how do I get past those feelings and support for me.
I want to just kind of touch on that a little bit again. Now, as for some reason I seem to always mention in these podcasts, I have 9 children. And the reason for mentioning that this time is you really realize how different each child is. I've got one who is just like a super genius, but wouldn't think to look both ways before crossing the street. And I would have let his younger sibling, I would have trusted the younger sibling to guide him across the street when they were 4 and 6. They're just different. And, some of them have been harder than others, which I think any parent with even 2 children will say. And I have gotten a lot of criticism from children are who they are, and you can't make every child be perfect from the time they're 2 years old. What would be your advice to people dealing with that kind of situation?
A situation of feeling judged by their own parents?
By anyone.
Or by anyone.
Even people in the grocery store. Because I have a friend who's run into that, where people are correcting her in the grocery store. I mean, her son's an adult now, but when he was quite young.
Yeah, that is tough. I think my biggest advice for parents, whether they're dealing with just their own feelings, like at home when it's just them and their kids, or going out into the world, is to really have support for themselves, whether it's a parent support group or a therapist or a trusted friend or family member or someone where you can go and spill out all of your emotions and get it out of your system and come back to knowing that you are a good person and a good parent.
Yeah.
Because then you're sort of, it's like a fresh, clean, clear, able to think and function person. Yeah. So for me, that really helps me then be more present with my kids, whether we are at home or out and about. Because if I'm judging myself and we're out and about, that's when I have
that only makes
zero
it
space for the kids,
parent.
And it makes it worse. Right. It's like a disaster waiting to happen. But if I'm relaxed and can be like, oh yeah, Sarah's having a hard time, well, why don't we step out? And if I can be really at ease about that, then I think that actually helps everyone else be more at ease.
I think that's really good advice. It's even if you're presenting as this is under control, we're calm, I'm dealing with it, rather than letting yourself get frazzled. And I think this is one reason now, having a large family, I've heard all the comments mostly that other people get. And I've always wondered, how come I'm not getting nearly as many obnoxious comments? Don't you have a TV? Don't you know what causes that? And I think one of the reasons is I've never been ashamed so when people ask, how many kids do you have? I'm beaming, I've got 9. And I think they don't maybe necessarily know how to react to that, or they're so taken aback, or they're kind of feeding off how I feel about it. And I can see exactly why that works in this other matter.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's great. So where can people find you online?
My website is watchingsarahrise.com. I am also on Facebook and Instagram as Jennifer Celeste Briggs or Jennifer Celeste Briggs author.
Okay, and I will have that rolling up the screen. You can find me at booksandbrews.net, lauravosica.com. Our sponsor is Gabriel's Horn Books, and that's gabrielshornpress.com. And you can see our wonderful farm animals at glenmerrillfarms.wordpress.com. I am thrilled to say I just nursed a sheep back to health. And yeah, we're fairly new to this, and so I had to learn to give sheep injections. And I was thrilled to death the day she jumped up and objected. I was like, I know you're getting better if you can object to this. So, but our animals are on there. And coming next, I believe you're number 27. So our guest number 28 on Books and Brews Light is Kelly Allegretti. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. And she writes mystery. So watch for that to come. Cheers.